This is CR Change Request. From the Sunday Desk, your structural brief for the week ending Sunday, June 14th, 2026. This week's read covers 8 signals across platform fraud, AI search liability, child development, healthcare workforce finance, federal contracting, municipal infrastructure, tokenized ownership, and submarine cable security. On the surface, this week looks like 8 separate stories: a bank arguing with a social platform, a court ruling in Munich, a brain study, a loan rule, a contracting program, a conduit under Baltimore, a rocket company going public, a set of cables on the ocean floor. But read together, they ask one question in 8 rooms. When something goes wrong or when something becomes valuable, who gets assigned the cost? Who gets assigned the burden? And who keeps control of the layer underneath everyone else? That assignment is the week. Let me walk you through it. The first signal sits where the money is already moving because somebody just got handed a bill that was addressed somewhere else on purpose. Start with the picture you already know. Somebody pays for a couch on Marketplace that never existed. Their bank refunds them the way the rules now require. And the platform that sold the scammer the ad, built the targeting, and collected the money never sees a dime of that loss. Hold on to that, because that small everyday robbery is the whole signal in miniature. On the surface, the news version is a corporate feud. Lloyds, one of the UK's largest banks, published numbers pointing at Meta, and the coverage treated it like two giants trading blame. That framing misses the machinery underneath. The reimbursement rule made the banks the underwriters of the scam feed. Lloyds analyzed fraud reports from more than 25 million retail customers between March 2025 and March 2026, and 68% of purchase fraud reports trace back to Meta platforms. The platform-linked loss estimate rose from £27 million in 2023 to about £66 million, and the average claim came in above £500. That is not a press release. That is a bank quietly building a case file. So why is the bank the one keeping the receipts? Because since October 7, 2024, the UK has required payment firms to refund victims of what is known as authorized push payment fraud, the kind where you are tricked into sending the money yourself in most cases, with the refund capped at £85,000 per claim. Regulation handed the cost to the layer that moves the money and left the layer that sold the lie out of the bill entirely. The feed got the revenue. The bank got the invoice. The pattern is older than this case. When regulators cannot reach the layer where the harm starts, they build the layer they can reach, and that turns banks into insurers of an environment they do not run. Insurance logic always plays forward the same way. Whoever pays the claim eventually wants a say over the risk. So read the Lloyds release for what it is. It is not a complaint. It is the opening move in a fight over who splits the bill. For operators, there are 3 tails to track: formal proposals to pull platforms into the refund pool, new friction at the payment rail, slower transfers, and sharper warnings on social commerce purchases, because banks will price the risk they cannot refuse. And more banks publishing their own fraud attribution data, because the case file is how the rule gets rewritten. The £85,000 cap and the October 2024 regime are your anchors. Fraud does not only happen inside the transaction. Sometimes it is designed upstream, monetized in the feed, and reimbursed somewhere else. If that signal is about who pays for the scam, the next one is about who answers for the answer. Same question, different production line. A Munich court ruled that Google is legally liable for false claims that appeared in its AI overviews, those summary paragraphs the search engine now writes at the top of your results, and Google plans to appeal. The headline wants this to be about one company losing one case in one country. The hinge is the distinction the court drew. Old Search hands you a list of links and says, go look. AI overviews skip the list and just tell you the answer in their own words. And the court said if you are going to talk, you own what you said. That moves Google from the library front desk to the author's chair. Routing was privileged, authorship was not. Picture the human cost of that for a second. A small business owner searches their own company name and finds a confident, machine-written paragraph telling the world something false about them. There is no reporter to call, no editor to email, no comment section to correct. The machine said it, the machine moved on, and the owner is left arguing with a paragraph that has no author. Until this ruling, nobody was holding the pen. A court just decided somebody is, and that somebody signs Google's paychecks. The whole legal shelter of the platform era was built for a directory. Host it, rank it, point to it, and you were covered. Because you did not say it, you just sorted it. The minute the product starts answering in its own voice, it walks out from under that shelter because the shelter was never built for things that talk. The appeal will set the legal marker, but the quieter tale is already showing. AI products will start dressing their answers back up to look like a list of links again. More citations, more on the other hand, more carefully hedged language, because the protection follows the form. The cheapest way to dodge the liability of speaking is to go back to pointing. Safe harbor was built for hosting. There is no harbor for speaking. Both of those signals are about consequence finding a new address. The next two are about conditions doing the same thing, except the address is a child's body and a worker's career path. The coverage filed this one under parenting news, screen time and young brains, the kind of study that gets reduced to advice. The headline is useful, but it stops too early. Researchers analyzed brain scans from nearly 12,000 children ages 9 to 10 and found that socioeconomic factors accounted for about 16% of the variability in children's brain function. Sleep, screen time, and stress showed their own links to brain features. Hold that 16% for a moment. These are associations, not destiny. And that caution matters because the point is not doom. The point is dosage. Name the inputs for what they actually are. Sleep is a housing outcome. A child's bedtime is set by thin walls, a parent's night shift, and how early the bus comes. Stress is an income outcome. It tracks the week the rent jumped and the hours got cut. Screen time is often a childcare outcome. The tablet babysits because the after-school program has a wait list and a fee. Nobody in that apartment is making bad choices. They are absorbing conditions they did not set, and the brain scan is just the receipt that finally made it visible. This connects to decades of research on how where you live shapes how you do. But the imaging work changes the conversation. It is no longer a gap that shows up in test scores years later. It is measurable difference in brain function at age 9. Policy still argues about neighborhoods as real estate. The data is starting to treat them as something closer to a developmental input, like nutrition. The forward signal here is migration. That 12,000 child cohort and that 16% figure are headed for housing quality arguments, school funding fights, and courtrooms that have nothing to do with pediatrics. And when the framing shifts from how kids turn out to what they are handed, the budgets follow. The neighborhood is not background, it is developmental infrastructure. If the neighborhood writes itself into the brain, the financing rules write themselves into the workforce. That is the next signal. The Department of Education finalized its graduate loan rule, and it is moving through the news as borrowing math, caps, and limits and effective dates. The cap is arithmetic, the classification is policy. The final rule kept a narrow definition of professional student, and that definition leaves out fields like graduate nursing and physical therapy, so those students do not get the higher borrowing limit. Students the rule counts as professional can borrow up to $50,000 a year and $200,000 total. Everyone else in graduate school is capped at $20,500 a year and $100,000 total. Most of it takes effect July 1st. So a definitions list with roots going back roughly 70 years is quietly helping decide who can afford to train for the healthcare jobs of the 2030s. Anyone close to the machinery has seen this move before. A label decides the flow long before the market does. Visa categories, licensing tiers, billing codes. The word moves first, and the people move after it. And feel who is on the other end of this. The nurse running the floor at 3 in the morning is being told by a list she has never read that her graduate degree does not count as professional. Meanwhile, every hospital network's 10-year staffing plan quietly depends on people financing exactly that degree. The shortage everyone will write think pieces about in 2031 is being set right now in a financing table nobody is reading. After July 1st, track enrollment in the left out programs because the cap will reroute students before any dean says a word. Track employers stepping in to finance tuition to backfill what the federal cap no longer covers. And track the pressure to quietly amend that professional student definition, because once the shortage shows up, the cheapest fix is the list. Workforce shortages are often visible first in financing rules, not hiring data. Classification carried those two signals. Evidence carries the next one. And the currency of proof just changed. The SBA proposed a rule change to what is known as the 8A Business Development Program, the federal on-ramp that helps disadvantaged-owned small firms win government contracts. And the coverage slots it into the familiar fight over diversity programs. The public conversation is circling the wrong object. Underneath the politics, this is a redesign of what you have to prove. The proposed rule applies to firms owned by individuals. It does not touch firms owned by entities like tribes, and it removes the rebuttable presumption, the built-in assumption that members of certain groups have faced disadvantage. It also changes what an applicant has to submit to show that disadvantage. Comments are due July 13th, 2026. So what does taking away that assumption actually do? It moves the work onto you. Now the applicant has to prove a disadvantage that by its nature rarely left a paper trail. And that is the quiet catch. Documentation rewards people whose disadvantage came with paperwork, and structural discrimination almost never issues a receipt. If you have lived in these rooms, you know eligibility rules rarely announce who they are shutting out. They just change what counts as proof and let the paperwork do the quiet work. The carve out tells you something too. Entity owned firms keep their lane, while individually owned firms have to clear the new bar. So the weight lands unevenly inside the very same program. And where the weight lands tells you where the aim is. The comment window closes July 13th. After any final rule, the number to watch is the approval rate for individually owned firms, because wherever a burden moves, a whole consulting industry grows up around helping people carry it. When the presumption is removed, the burden does not vanish. It moves to the applicant. And before we leave the question of proof, a short callback. Last week, the story was homelessness as access and funding machinery. This week, Los Angeles added the certification piece. HUD alleges that LAHSA, the agency that runs homeless services for the city and county, repeatedly signed off on financial controls and conflict safeguards it did not actually have. And the agency has 30 days to contest its suspension. Last week, the story was the money. This week, it is the signature on the form. The certification, not only the spending, is the tripwire. That takes us from what institutions have to prove to what cities actually control. The next signal sits under the streets of Baltimore, and it almost settled itself through pure silence. Baltimore decided not to let its conduit agreement with BGE, the local utility, renew on autopilot and chose to renegotiate instead. The coverage files it as a local utility story, the kind that lives and dies on a council agenda nobody reads. Look closer. The conduit is Baltimore's 740-mile network of underground pipes that carry utility lines. The city owns it. BGE sits in more than 3/4 of it, and the deal would have renewed itself automatically unless the city sent a letter by July 1st. Ownership never moved, control did, and defaults are policy. What does the city actually own if the terms renew themselves? A deed without a pen. The residents' electric bill runs through pipes the public owns, and the terms of that arrangement were about to be locked in by nobody mailing a letter. You already know this pattern from the era when cities leased out their parking meters, garages, and toll roads, then woke up years later to find the revenue had been privatized while the liability stayed home with a plaque on it. Most of what cities give away, they give away by missing a date. The renegotiation terms to hold are the rate structure, the audit rights, and the length of the deal, because those three decide whether the city actually got its pen back or just reset the same clock. And trust me, every city lawyer who saw this story has already pulled their own evergreen contract out of the drawer. Public infrastructure does not stop being public just because the revenue stream gets privatized. Baltimore's question is, who controls the public layer? The next signal asks the same question about the market, and it asked it on opening day. SpaceX went public this week in a $75 billion IPO. Shares opened at $150 and closed at $160.95. And the coverage ran it as a triumph of market story. The pop is not the signal, the plumbing is. On the very same day as the NASDAQ listing, SpaceX shares were also set to trade on Solana, a blockchain network where assets change hands directly around the clock without the traditional exchange in the middle. They traded there through a tokenized stock called SPCX, issued by Backpack Securities. The token stands in for real underlying SpaceX shares. It can be cashed out through Backpack's brokerage, and it trades any hour of any day on supported Solana venues. Do not rush past the timing. This is not tokenized stocks exist now. This is two completely separate sets of rails for the same company, launched on the same day, enabled by regulated brokerage partners right alongside the public listing. One symbol, two settlement systems. And notice where the access promise quietly narrows. The pitch is freedom, ownership for everyone, open all night. Then you hit one word: eligible. The all hours room still has a door, and the door still has a list. If you allocate capital, you have seen this movie. The shiny new rail does not erase the old questions. Who holds the shares? Who hits the brakes at 3 in the morning when something breaks? Whether the token is still worth what the NASDAQ says the stock is worth when markets get rough. And which regulator owns this thing? Because the SEC and CFTC are going to be deciding that line on every one of these. When the official exchange and the parallel rail open on the same day, where a trade settles stops being a given and starts being a choice. And companies just learned they can run two markets for one stock on purpose. The forward markers are three. Whether other late stage names copy the dual listing. What happens to the redemption mechanics the first time the token and the ticker disagree on price? And how regulators respond to a stock that never stops trading, because the rule book still assumes the market goes to sleep. Tokenization does not remove the market's old questions. It moves them into a faster room. And the last signal sits right where this whole week has been pointing, at the question of who licenses the layer underneath everyone else's access. The FCC drafted what is known as a second report and order on submarine cables. And if it got covered at all, it got covered as telecom housekeeping. Underneath the housekeeping is a two-sided redesign of who gets to build the physical internet. Because that is what those cables are. The undersea lines that carry almost all the world's internet traffic between continents. The order would fast-track new cable projects for applicants who meet national security standards while creating a new licensing requirement for the companies that own and operate the equipment at the ends of the cable, the boxes where the ocean line comes ashore and plugs into the network. An express lane for trusted operators, a new gate at the equipment level. Licensing is moving down the stack, from the routes to the landing points to the hardware itself. Grounded in your own day, your video call, your payroll file, the backup you call the cloud. At some point, all of it rides a physical cable that comes ashore on an actual beach with an actual street address. Anyone close to this build-out knows the pattern because it is the same one that ran through the bands on certain network gear and the chip export controls. Control slides down to the lowest level you can still get your hands on. The content was too hard to police, the carrying was harder, so the rules went to the equipment. The two-sided design is the part that compounds. Speed becomes the reward, and the license becomes the gate, which turns being trusted into an asset, something you qualify for and your competitors do not. Follow which operators make the express lane, because the trusted list is industrial policy wearing a security badge. Follow how the equipment licensing costs ripple into the timelines for building out the cloud. And follow whether allied countries copy the design, because cable rules travel in packs. The cloud has a coastline, and once infrastructure touches geography, security becomes policy. So pull the week into one structure, 8 signals, one pattern, and the pattern is assignment. Lloyd's counted the fraud, and the rules sent the bill to the banks while the feed kept the revenue. A Munich court said that when a platform writes the answer, it may own the answer. Nearly 12,000 brain scans showed a child's circumstances settling into the body before any classroom measures the result. A definitions list is deciding who can afford to train for the next healthcare workforce. The SBA is rewriting what counts as proof. Baltimore refused to let a default clause renew control over public infrastructure. SpaceX ran one stock on two settlement systems in a single day. And the FCC moved licensing all the way down to the equipment at the water's edge. The governing machinery is not only arguing in public right now, it is assigning. It assigns costs through reimbursement rules, burdens through evidence standards, conditions through housing and financing math, and control through defaults, eligibility screens, and licenses. The people and institutions absorbing these assignments are usually named last, if they are named at all. Some of them are 9 years old. The assignment is the policy. This week's instruction: when a rule changes, do not stop at what it says. Read it for what it assigns. Track where the cost lands, not where the blame goes. Track where the burden moves, not where the press release points. And that's the brief for this week. Good to be in the room with you. Until next time, this has been CR Change Request.